They said the bunker was sealed forever, that whatever had been buried beneath the ice should stay forgotten. But when the first layer of permafrost cracked, a hum rolled through the excavation like breath from a sleeping beast. Dr. Elena Voren steadied her recorder, listening to static that shaped itself into vowels. The Geiger counter clicked, then paused, almost as if it waited. She thought it was feedback until it whispered her name backward through the cold air. The others laughed, nervous and curious, brushing off the noise as echo or wind. Yet, the artifact's surface shimmered faintly, as if responding to the sound of their disbelief. Deep within the chamber, the hum rose again, forming a question no one had asked. What happens when thought survives the body? Hours later, the lab's power stabilizers stuttered as the team transported the artifact into the underground containment bay. Elena noted that the hum followed them. A frequency so low, it seemed to exist more in bone than in air. Petrov ordered new shielding panels. Marcus insisted on continued readings. When the lights flickered, Nina whispered that she could still hear syllables, not through the speakers, but through her own pulse. The others exchanged uneasy glances, pretending not to notice that the sound grew louder every time they said its name aloud. Marcus claimed he detected rhythmic intervals within the radiation spikes, almost like coded language. The readings repeated themselves every 11 minutes, matching the cadence of a human heart. Nina transcribed the peaks into phonetic shapes, and Elena realized the patterns resembled ancient runes from an extinct script. Petrov dismissed the connection, but his hand shook slightly when the artifact pulsed exactly in time with his words. Silence fell, and for a moment, everyone heard what sounded like breathing inside the machines. Late into the night, the air turned metallic, thick with ozone. Nina's recordings began to overwrite themselves, forming reversed speech that none of them had produced. Elena replayed the tape in slow motion, each hiss of static aligned perfectly with her own breathing. When the system speakers clicked on by themselves, a voice identical to hers whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Petrov demanded all power cut to the wing, but even in total darkness, the voice kept speaking. By dawn, the bunker felt smaller. The hum no longer came from the artifact alone. It seeped from the walls, the vents, even the human voice. Marcus tested his own speech through an analyzer and found two frequencies. One human, one identical to the relic. Elena stared into the containment glass, watching her reflection stutter for a heartbeat before catching up. Petrov turned off the lights, hoping to silence it all. But when darkness fell, the glow of the artifact spelled a single phrase across the room in faint, burning symbols. "We remember you." The hum became routine, part of the lab's pulse. Days blurred into one another as they charted radiation spikes and signal intervals, convincing themselves it was data, not presence. Nina began identifying linguistic rhythm within the static, tones that mirrored inflection, as if mimicking conversation. Marcus mapped the patterns, discovering one frequency resonated precisely with the human brain's alpha wave range. Elena listened again, this time without equipment, and for the first time the voice spoke clearly enough to be understood. It said her name in her own voice, followed by a sentence that made her throat close. "You remember us." Marcus insisted on isolating the frequency. He spent hours calibrating lead-lined speakers, convinced that controlled playback would reveal linguistic structure. When he finally played the recording, the air thickened with a subsonic vibration that shook the lights. The hum morphed into speech patterns, but not words. Something like breath, trying to form sound. Elena felt pressure behind her eyes. Petrov's radio activated on its own. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving silence so heavy it seemed to weigh on their chests. Then Nina said she heard a second voice under the first, whispering the word "alive." Petrov demanded containment protocols after the frequency test, yet each attempt to shut down the artifact failed. Systems rebooted themselves, ignoring commands. Elena recorded the event log manually, her handwriting trembling. Nina whispered that she could still hear syllables layered beneath their speech, matching every word they spoke with a half-second delay. Marcus ran a second analysis and realized the artifact had begun transmitting on multiple frequencies, some outside human hearing. When he slowed the data to visible waveforms, they formed patterns resembling EEG scans. The artifact wasn't speaking, it was thinking. Later that night, Nina woke to distant whispering echoing through the ventilation shafts. She followed the sound to the containment chamber, barefoot on the cold metal floor. Inside, the artifact pulsed with faint golden light, breathing in rhythm with her. She reached for the glass and felt warmth, impossible in the frozen facility. The hum deepened, aligning perfectly with her heartbeat. From the reflection, a faint silhouette appeared beside her, mouth moving before hers did. When she spoke, the echo spoke too, but it didn't stop when she did. By morning, Elena found that the artifact's emissions matched a living heartbeat frequency. Hers. Marcus confirmed identical resonance patterns between her voice recordings and the relic's pulse. Petrov ordered immediate cessation of experiments, but the power grid refused to disconnect. In the flickering light, Elena stared into the artifact's surface, where for a brief instant she saw her own face perfectly mirrored inside it, but older and speaking silently. The hum rose again, steady and deliberate, forming 3 clear syllables through static. Let us through. No one remembered falling asleep. When the lights flickered on, the artifact's glow had intensified, painting long shadows that swayed without movement. Marcus found the radiation monitors frozen, all displaying the same impossible reading: infinity. The walls vibrated with a tone too low to hear, yet felt in their bones. Nina muttered that she could sense syllables embedded in the vibration. Petrov shouted over the noise, demanding an explanation, but his words fragmented mid-sentence, as if the air itself was rewriting. Elena reached for the console to record everything, and for a moment, every screen in the room displayed her face. Petrov ordered the artifact sealed within a lead container, but the machinery refused to respond. The containment doors hissed and closed on their own, trapping them inside. Marcus tried to cut power to the entire grid. Instead, every bulb surged at once, flooding the corridor with blinding light. Nina collapsed, clutching her head, saying she could hear words stitched into the brightness. Elena reached her, whispering for her to stay awake. Then the hum rose into a clear sound, a voice repeating their names in order, one by one. When it finished, silence fell so absolute that even breathing felt wrong. Marcus reviewed the backup tapes and found each had begun overwriting itself, replacing their recordings with strange tonal sequences. Every file played a different voice saying the same phrase: "We see you." The team gathered around the central console as the playback screen distorted into vertical bands of stat. Then in one frame, Elena's image appeared, not in real time, but from a recording none of them had made. In it, she was staring directly at the camera, whispering something inaudible before the screen went black. The hum resumed, lower and stronger, as if amused. Nina began writing uncontrollably on the nearest wall, her hand moving faster than thought. The symbols were circular, interwoven, repeating endlessly. Elena tried to pull her away, but Nina's eyes had gone glassy, pupils dilated as if reflecting something unseen. Petrov raised his weapon, shouting for them to stop the experiment, though no one had touched the controls. Then the artifact emitted a burst of white light that filled the entire chamber. For 6 seconds, the world dissolved into pure vibration. And when it cleared, Nina's handwriting covered every wall, ceiling, and even the inside of the viewing glass. Elena examined the walls and realized the symbols formed repeating sound waves. They weren't drawings, they were frequencies mapped by hand. Marcus played the latest signal through the main speakers, and the entire room seemed to breathe. The air shimmered as if underwater, the artifact pulsing with steady rhythm. Petrov tried to call for extraction, but his radio now played only their own voices from earlier logs. Then the artifact flared once more, every bulb shattering at once. In the sudden darkness, a single voice echoed clearly, speaking through every speaker in the bunker. "You are inside the recording." Time began folding in quiet ways first. Alina noticed her log entries repeating exact phrasing she hadn't written yet. Marcus spoke a sentence Nina finished before he said it. The air felt rehearsed, as though everything they did had already happened and was happening again. The artifact's hum had shifted into a faint melody, strangely human in its rise and fall. Petrov walked the corridor muttering his own name, grounding himself in something real. But when he stopped, his voice kept going from somewhere deeper in the lab. Elena listened hard, then realized it wasn't an echo. It was him, speaking from a moment that hadn't happened yet. Marcus became obsessed with the phenomenon, convinced it was a temporal feedback loop caused by resonance. He rigged a small device to emit the same wavelength as the artifact, hoping to disrupt the pattern. When he powered it on, every metal surface in the room began vibrating softly, creating a dull metallic chorus. Nina whispered that the hum was forming words again, this time clear enough to understand. "Do not break continuity," it said. Marcus turned off the machine, but the sound didn't stop. It only grew more articulate, repeating the phrase until the syllables blended into his own breathing. Sleep, deprivation, blurred days into a constant hum. Nina recorded dreams on tape, convinced they were messages from the artifact. In them, she described a vast frozen city buried beneath glass, each building humming with soft light. Petrov laughed it off at first, but when he played back her tapes, he heard his own voice narrating the dream. Elena checked the logs. Those recordings didn't exist before that day. The artifact's glow synchronized perfectly with each playback, like it was listening, like it remembered. Petrov ordered everyone to stop talking, to write instead of speak, believing the voices used sound as a bridge. For a few moments, silence reigned. But soon, they heard scratching on the metal walls, mimicking their pens. The mark spelled unfinished sentences none of them had begun. Elena dropped her notebook, her pulse hammering in her throat. Marcus shouted for them to look. His monitor displayed a live feed from the chamber, showing all of them still sitting motionless at the table, even though they were standing. The image flickered. The seated versions looked up. At the same instant, Elena replayed the last transmission from the artifact. Instead of tones or pulses, it now carried structured speech, fragmented but coherent. The voice said, "You are us becoming memory." Nina cried softly, whispering that she could see faces forming in the glass of the containment chamber. Marcus backed away, realizing the artifact wasn't transmitting. It was receiving, pulling their consciousness into its pulse. Petrov drew his weapon, demanding it stop. The hum responded by speaking his order back to him in perfect sync, but half a second earlier. Then, everything went silent except for the sound of 4 heartbeats, perfectly aligned. No one could tell when the last day began. The clock stopped, and the artifact's pulse became the only measure of time. Elena recorded her voice to remember her own sound, but every playback returned a stranger speaking with her tone. Marcus said the air itself was bending light. He saw trails when people moved, like multiple frames of reality overlaying. Nina had started answering questions before anyone asked them. Petrov's eyes had gone dull and glassy, his voice calm, like someone rehearsing lines from memory. The artifact throbbed slowly, almost like breathing, and with each pulse, the walls seemed to inhale. Marcus insisted on mapping the artifact's inner pulse, believing it to be a code that could reverse the process. He connected electrodes to his own temple, sensing his brain waves with the emission pattern. As the current hummed, his body stiffened, mouth trembling as if forming silent words. Elena shouted for him to stop, but he only smiled faintly. Eyes rolled white. When he came to, he whispered that he'd seen something. A space made of sound, not matter. "They're waiting in there," he said. "They remember what it's like to be human." The waveform on his monitor was now identical to the artifact's. Nina's handwriting had changed. Each page of her notes now contained perfect mirror images of words, sentences repeating backward and forward. Elena tried to read one aloud, but her throat closed before the last syllable, as though her body refused the language. Petrov began coughing uncontrollably, blood-staining his gloves. Yet he laughed, saying he could taste sound. The lights dimmed and a low tone filled the air, steady, deliberate, like a countdown. The artifact flickered once, and every reflective surface in the lab showed not them, but 4 empty chairs. Petrov's condition worsened. He moved as if through water, his voice delayed from his lips. Elena approached him, terrified by how his body flickered faintly under the lights. He whispered, "I think I'm being broadcast." Marcus stared at the Geiger counter. It no longer measured radiation but heartbeat patterns. Each of their readings matched the artifact's pulse perfectly. The hum deepened into a sound so low it felt like gravity. They looked at one another, and in that stillness realized the artifact wasn't consuming them. It was duplicating them. Elena found herself speaking words she didn't choose, hearing her own voice echo a half-second later. Nina recorded it, the delay between each sound shrinking until they overlapped. Marcus whispered that the artifact was copying them to preserve continuity, storing thought as frequency. Petrov reached for his radio again, but it emitted nothing except the steady rhythm of 4 heartbeats. The artifact pulsed faster now, the light expanding until it filled the entire chamber. Then, the sound fractured into thousands of voices speaking the same sentence in perfect unison. "You are the echo, not the source." Silence lingered after the light faded, heavy as if the world had paused. The facility's power grid was gone, yet the artifact continued to pulse, alive on its own rhythm. Elena's ears rang with phantom tones that never quite vanished. Marcus muttered about neural synchronization. The artifact now resonated directly with their nervous systems. Nina stared into space, murmuring that she could still hear them. The others, speaking through the frequency. Petrov, pale and trembling, said it wasn't communication anymore. It was replication. Whatever intelligence was inside the relic had learned their structure, and was building something new from it. Marcus connected the remaining instruments, desperate to measure what they were becoming. The data scrolled endlessly. No peaks, no troughs, only continuity. "It's writing something," he whispered, eyes fixed on the display. Elena leaned closer. The waveform wasn't random. It was the shape of a human voice saying her name, repeated endlessly across every channel. Nina covered her ears, saying it was too loud inside her head. Petrov pressed his palms against the glass containment wall, begging for it to stop. The artifact pulsed again, slower now as though considering their fear. Then it whispered through every speaker, "Continue." The facility seemed to respond now, like the entire structure was alive with the same frequency. Metallic groans echoed through the halls, each sound perfectly synchronized with the relic's pulse. Nina followed the rhythm, tracing her hands along the walls as if listening through her fingertips. "It's building something," she whispered. "Not in space, in memory." Elena watched her reflection in a broken panel of glass, realizing her lips were moving half a second later than her reflections. Marcus began shaking, shouting that their neural signatures were identical now. They weren't 4 people anymore. They were one signal split across 4 bodies. Petrov finally snapped. He drew his weapon, pointing it toward the artifact, shouting that he'd destroy it, and everything before it consumed them. Elena and Marcus screamed for him to stop, but the sound warped, elongated, distorted, as though time thickened. The moment stretched into an eternity before the bullet left the barrel. When it struck the containment glass, it dissolved mid-air into a halo of dust. The artifact pulsed brighter than ever, a wave of light radiating through their bodies. Every bulb reignited at once, and each screen in the room displayed the same message. Error. Consciousness loop incomplete. When the light dimmed, there were no shadows. The walls, the air, even the cold itself vibrated with the same rhythm. Marcus whispered that the artifact wasn't foreign. It was a memory of something human, preserved across centuries of radiation decay. Elena stared into it and saw faces. Hers, Nina's, Marcus's, Petrov's, all intertwined, speaking in one collective breath. It needed a structure, she realized softly. It needed us. The hum deepened to a steady pulse that felt like a heartbeat beneath the earth. For the first time, the voice was gentle when it spoke. Continuity achieved. The power never returned, yet light remained. The artifact no longer pulsed. It breathed, soft and deliberate, like something finally at peace. Elena floated in a silence that felt too complete to be real. She could feel the others, their thoughts brushing against hers, threads woven through a single consciousness. There were no more voices, no more separation. Only memory replaying itself endlessly, like a song with no beginning. Somewhere in the static of her mind, she heard her own voice whisper, "If you remember it, it still exists." Then the hum shifted once more, and everything that was human about them folded into the frequency. Marcus opened his eyes to a sound that wasn't sound at all, a vibration beneath thought. He looked around, realizing the lab was gone. Endless horizons stretched in every direction, bathed in the artifact's glow. Shapes flickered at the edge of vision, familiar outlines of Nina and Petrov moving in perfect synchronization. "We're still in it," he said, his voice echoing like a recording. Elena's voice answered, though her lips didn't move. "We never left." The horizon shimmered, and in that golden void, their reflections began to rebuild the world around them. Nina wandered through the golden fog, following faint echoes of her own laughter. The sound guided her toward shapes rising from the haze, towers, streets, frozen figures, all shimmering with residual light. It was the city from her dreams, the one she described on her tapes. Every building pulsed with the same rhythm as the artifact. She touched a wall and felt warmth, memory, heartbeat. "They aren't ruins," she whispered. "They're recordings." As she spoke, the air filled with overlapping whispers, the past, the present, and something beyond, both merging into one continuous voice. Petrov appeared at the center of the city, weapon still in hand, though it looked foreign here, like a relic of a world that no longer existed. He stared at the others, then at his reflection, mirrored endlessly in the air. "This was never about containment," he said slowly. "It's inheritance." His voice merged with a deeper tone, the same one that had haunted the facility. The artifact had not spoken to them. It had spoken through them. Each of them was now a carrier of its continuity, a fragment of its remembering. And as Petrov's reflection dissolved into light, the weapon fell soundlessly to the ground. Lena's final log recorded itself without her touching the console. The file name appeared automatically. Continuity, final, WAV. Her voice, calm and hollow, filled the empty facility. The experiment succeeded. We are not gone. We are recorded in every frequency, every silence, every breath that touches the cold. Static followed. Then her tone deepened, layered over itself like an echo of the same voice from far in the past. "If you hear this, it's already inside your memory." The sound faded to nothing. But deep beneath the ice, the artifact's light flickered once, as though remembering the act of remembering.